What's the most awkward wedding you have ever witnessed? I've got a story for you that makes every other awkward wedding look like a rom-com. It's a hot July day, a sprawling country estate, and a wedding that was destined to be the social event of the year. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. So my cousin Joe decides he's madly in love with a woman named Tiffany. Tiffany is, how do I put this delicately? She's the kind of woman who could make a sunny day seem like a thunderstorm. Always with a complaint, a backhanded compliment, or a scowl that could curdle milk. But love is blind, and apparently, so is common sense. The ceremony itself was a hot mess from the get-go. First, there's the issue with the seating. You know how traditionally the bride's family sits on one side and the groom's on the other? Well, someone, Tiffany, of course, decided that it would be more modern to mix everyone up. What a splendid idea. If only Tiffany's family wasn't a collection of the most vocal, opinionated people you'd ever meet. Imagine putting die-hard sports fans from rival teams together at a playoff game. That was the vibe. Then, there's the matter of the flower girl. Sweet little Susie, age 6, had a sudden bout of stage fright and refused to walk down the aisle. Instead, she bolted and hid under the dessert table. Her mother had to coax her out with promises of ice cream, but by then, Tiffany was fuming. Not exactly the serene elegance start one hopes for. The officiant, a college friend of Joe's who got ordained online, thought it would be a great idea to spice up the ceremony with a few jokes. Unfortunately, his sense of humor was about as sharp as a butter knife. He started with, "Marriage is a lot like a deck of cards. In the beginning, all you need are 2 hearts and a diamond. By the end, you wish you had a club and a spade." The silence that followed was so deafening that you could hear the crickets outside. Oh, and let's not forget the vows. Joe, sweet simple Joe, had decided to write his own vows. Joe gets up there and starts with, "Tiffany, you're my best friend, my soulmate, my reason for living," and suddenly, his phone buzzes loudly. In the silence of the moment. With a ringtone that's, wait for it, Darth Vader's theme from Star Wars. Perfectly timed for when he says, "My reason for living." Turns out, Joe forgot to turn his phone off, and his best man thought it'd be hilarious to text him at that exact moment. Joe, flustered, fumbles to silence the phone, drops his notes, and ends up just winging the rest of the vows. Let's just say, improvisation is not his strong suit. At one point, he actually says, "Tiffany, I promise to tolerate your shoe collection even though it takes up more space than my entire wardrobe." There was an audible gasp from the guests. Tiffany's vows were equally cringeworthy, but in a different way. She had apparently taken a How to Be Poetic course from the local community college and decided to use all her newfound knowledge at once. Imagine Shakespeare meets Hallmark card, but with less coherence. "Joe, you are the lighthouse in the stormy seas of my soul, the peanut butter to my jelly, the Wi-Fi to my internet browsing." The guests' expressions ranged from confusion to barely suppressed laughter. Now, let's talk about the reception. The venue was gorgeous, but the catering, it was a disaster. Tiffany had insisted on a vegan menu. Nothing against vegans, but most of Joe's family are the kind of people who think a meal isn't complete without a slab of meat. Cue the grumbling and surreptitious orders to the nearest pizza place. By the time the entrees were served, Uncle Bob had organized a covert operation to smuggle in burgers. The first dance was equally memorable. They had taken dance lessons, which was evident for about 30 seconds. Then Joe stepped on Tiffany's dress, and she went down like a sack of potatoes. She was fine, but her dignity was in shreds. Joe, ever the gentleman, tried to help her up, but instead, they both ended up on the floor in a tangle of tulle and tears. As the night went on, things got progressively worse. The best man's speech was an unfiltered roast of Joe, filled with anecdotes that should have never seen the light of day. There was the time Joe got stuck in a tree trying to impress a girl, or the infamous incident involving a mop bucket and a fire alarm. Tiffany's maid of honor tried to salvage the situation with a heartfelt speech, but ended up sobbing halfway through because she just loved Tiffany so much. At one point, the DJ, who clearly had a few too many at the open bar, decided to switch things up with an impromptu karaoke session. He kicked it off with a slurred rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody that had everyone cringing and looking for the nearest exit. Tiffany's great aunt grabbed the mic next and belted out a version of Like a Virgin that would have made Madonna herself blush. I'm pretty sure some of the older guests are still recovering from the shock. By the time the cake cutting rolled around, everyone was ready for the grand finale. Tiffany had chosen a towering confection that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Joe and Tiffany cut the first slice, and as per tradition, Tiffany tried to playfully smear a big piece of cake on Joe's face. Joe, with reflexes nobody knew he had, ducked, and the cake splattered all over his mother, who had been critical of the entire wedding from the start. She stood there, covered in icing, with a look of sheer disbelief that quickly turned to rage. The evening ended with a full-blown argument between the families, Tiffany storming off and Joe chasing after her. The guests were left to awkwardly make their exits, murmuring about what they'd just witnessed. The honeymoon, from what I heard, wasn't much better. They had planned a romantic getaway to a secluded island, but their luggage ended up in a different country. They spent the first 3 days in the same clothes they wore on the plane, trying to communicate with hotel staff who spoke no English. Tiffany, naturally, blamed Joe for the mix-up, and the arguing resumed. By the time they finally got their luggage, they were both ready to come home. So there you have it, folks. The most awkward wedding I've ever attended. It was a train wreck from start to finish, but hey, it's a story I'll be telling for years. As for Joe and Tiffany, they're still together, somehow. Guess there really is someone for everyone, even if it takes a cake fight and a lot of awkward moments to prove it. If you ever think your wedding or any social event is going poorly, just remember Joe and Tiffany. Cheers to awkward weddings and the unforgettable stories they create.